This story is about my family's experience with Brant Community Healthcare System, Brantford site. My name is Jody Rock. I was born and raised in Brantford, moving away just a few years ago. Unfortunately, life for Indigenous people in Brantford is complicated by racism and discrimination. It is something that many, myself included, have come to accept as normal and tolerate. What has always been known as Brantford General Hospital to myself and my family has also been experienced in such a negative light. Story after story of anti-Indigenous racism has been shared amongst my family and community. Again, it was something that has been tolerated and accepted as normal. What I share is personal experience, significant moments in the life of myself and treasured family members. Around lunchtime on August 19th of this year, I received a call from my niece, frantic because my mom's PSW company had called and informed her that my mom, her grandma, was found unresponsive and was awaiting ambulance. My niece was working in a job where she did not have flexibility to leave. I was working from home with flexibility to change work locations and take breaks as necessary. I packed up my work, left my home in Hamilton, and drove to my mom's home in Brantford, where she lives alone. I walked into the home and was met with a stomach-turning stench, hanging heavy in the air. My stomach dropped to see the wrappings of various medical equipment supplies scattered across the floor. I stepped further into the home and noticed immediately large, clotted, and hardened pools of blood. A large pool in the kitchen, in the hallway to the bathroom, all over the bathroom floor, and dried, hardened puddles on the floor beside my mother's bed. Tears started to flow as I seen she had attempted to clean up the mess in the bathroom. Her purse was packed with her phone, wallet, and her medication list was not beside her bed where it usually was. I assumed she had realized she needed medical attention and was preparing to call an ambulance before she went unconscious. She lives with many chronic conditions, the longest standing being diabetes. Over the last 10 years, cirrhosis took hold. She had prepared a DNR and had many discussions with us over her final wishes. We knew with advanced cirrhosis, her death by bleeding out was a possibility. I feared the worst. The PSW company had shared she was responsive only to pain. I called the hospital immediately, and they had no record of her. I could only assume she was still in transport. Due to COVID, I was unsure if I could attend the ER with her, so I settled in and waited. I called again after an hour, and again after another hour. Once they were able to take the call, the ER staff was great in responding to my questions. The only thing they could tell me was that she was responsive only to pain. I asked about visitors and was told that she could have visitors, only one at a time for compassionate reasons. I immediately notified her two brothers, as it was her wish they be with her when it was her time to leave this world. We met at BCHS Emergency, entering one at a time for a visit with her. At this time, we were unsure of whether or not she would regain consciousness, and we were preparing ourselves for that final goodbye. My uncles went first. I went in around the time the night staff came on. I knew from previous experience that a nurse would be checking in with her shortly after 7, and I wanted an update before I left. I sat with my mom and waited. I watched her writhe in pain, seen the blood clotted and dried in her mouth, on her chin, her fingernails, and her feet. I could only imagine how scared she was. Vomiting blood so violently was something she had only experienced once before, and it was nowhere near the volume of this time. The nurses came in and answered my questions as best as they could, collecting information about what I knew of her last few days. They let me know that the doctor would be in shortly to see her, so I sat and waited. The doctor did eventually come in. She looked at my mom laying there on the bed and said, "Oh, I know this woman. She has been here before." I felt a bit of relief hearing the doctor may have some prior knowledge of my mom's condition and some previous experience working with her. She asked me about her last few days. I told her what I had been telling the nurse. She was eating little, was lethargic, had depressed mood. She said, "What about her drinking?" I answered to the best of my knowledge, telling her that there was a bottle of Gatorade beside her bed. She had told my niece the night before that it had taken her 2 days to drink half of it. She looked at me directly and said again, "What about her drinking?" with pointed emphasis on drinking. I had asked her, "What do you mean by that?" She steps away from the stretcher, extends her hand out, positioned like it is holding a glass. As she moves her hand back and forth to her mouth, tipping the imaginary cup, she says, "You know, drinking. Like wine. How much has she been drinking?" I was shocked. I couldn't believe that the ugly stereotype of drunk Indian was presenting itself then and there. Even though I have years of experience advocating for Indigenous people within health and social systems, even though I have completed formal training in how to name and address destructive colonial narratives as they appear in healthcare, even though I have been in a position to teach people how to recognize anti-Indigenous racism and how to interrupt harm, I was speechless. I couldn't respond. As soon as the doctor left the room, I left the emergency department in tears and sunk into my uncle, sobbing once I was back outside. The next day, I called and requested consult with patient relations. I wanted to know specifically if there was anything in my mom's chart to suggest she lived with alcohol dependency, and I wanted it to be removed if that was the case. She hadn't had alcohol in 30 plus years. We were told by her liver doctor that the cirrhosis was a result of diabetes. I was advised that the chart clearly had indicated non-alcohol related cirrhosis. The warm reception, understanding ear, and transparency my complaint was met with was a welcome relief. I felt heard and I had confidence BCHS would take action to ensure another family did not have to deal with such insensitivity and care clearly influenced by racist beliefs and attitudes. It is now 2 months since that time. My mom remains in hospital, working on physical rehab, and is very happy with the care and attention she receives. She is often talking about how caring and compassionate the staff are towards her. The only complaint she has is the food. Last week, her brother was admitted to the ER department, critical care unit, with double pneumonia and sepsis. She speaks to him a few times each day and had not seen him for months. CCU staff were very accommodating in updating her on his condition, answering her many questions. She had asked immediately if she would be able to see him. She was advised he wasn't allowed visitors until he was cleared of droplet precautions, and she was encouraged to involve social work as it was an unusual request, and both staff in CCU and on 2B were not sure if a visit could be possible. I called social work, spoke to staff on both units. During a call to receive an update on his condition, I was advised he was finally allowed visitors. The nurse was quite understanding in hearing how important it would be to both of them to have a visit. She booked a visit time for myself as a plan B and advised me to call the next day to speak to the charge nurse to see if my mom could take my place. Holiday Monday, Thanksgiving. I spoke to the charge nurse late in the morning. After a brief time away from the phone, she returned and granted permission for my mom to visit, advising she would be put down as one of my uncle's visitors. She could visit regularly. I called my mom immediately, and she was ecstatic. They had 2 visits together before he was discharged home. Good medicine for both of them. This would not have been possible without the compassion and understanding from both units. My mom's pleasure with the care she receives daily, the happiness of both my mom and uncle when they got to visit face to face for the first time in months. The relief they both felt knowing their sibling was being well cared for. All things that warmed my heart and took some of the sting away from that emergency room encounter. Even though no one should be prejudged and viewed through such a hurtful lens, I cannot imagine how my mom would be experiencing care differently had she heard what had been said about her, how she and her loved ones would have experienced BCHS knowing she was viewed as another drunk Indian. As horrible as it was for her to be disconnected from us and unresponsive, it was a blessing in disguise. I am very grateful for BCHS for giving me the opportunity to share this story. I recognize a lot of the investment and hard work that the hospital has done to improve Indigenous patient experience, and I am grateful. Thank you on behalf of myself, my family, and I'm certain other Indigenous community members that use this important service.